mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 9, the penultimate episode of Season 1 of HBO's Winning Time, entitled Acceptable Loss. You know, when I think about acceptable loss, I think about a loss that you can accept easier because there's some sort of win or some sort of positive aspect that you could take away from that loss. You know, I think, especially when it comes to sports, you know, you get a lot of times where your favorite team might lose a game, but you like, but I could see why, you justify why it's okay. I think a good example of this I could take from my Pistons in 2004 when they won a championship. You know, we've called it here in Detroit a 5-game sweep because even though the Pistons lost one of the games, it didn't feel like a loss. You know, game 2, the Pistons won game 1 in LA. Game 2, they lost in LA, but it took a game-tying 3-pointer, I believe, from Kobe to force overtime, and then they had to fight tooth and nail to win it in overtime. And I remember one of my friends called me, and he's like, man, I know you feel, and I know you upset the Pistons lost tonight. I'm like, well, actually, I'm not, because if that's what if it's gonna take a miraculous Kobe shot and fighting tooth and nail to win in overtime on your own floor just to get a win, I like our odds for the next 3 games in Detroit. And that's exactly what happened. All 3 games in Detroit were ass whoopings. And like I said, it felt like the Pistons never lost a game in that series, even though they did. And I think that's how I look at acceptable loss. So I looked at this episode with that title, and I thought, what kind of acceptable loss do we see in this episode? And I think obviously the biggest loss is Jerry Buss's mother. But I think what he could take away from that is a positive. And I know for him in that moment, it probably doesn't feel like an acceptable loss like that Pistons game did to me. But he could take away from that his mother died on her own terms, and he was able to be there for her in the way that he wanted. You know, a lot of times you don't get to have that option to kind of choose how a loved one, not choose how they die, but choose how their life ends, if that makes sense, the distinction I'm drawing. Like, all we know, like, she could have died in a car accident. She could have died in an airplane crash. She could have choked on some food. She could have died from her illness while he was off somewhere else. But instead, at least in this version of the show, he got to spend a really good time with her, while she was still coherent. He got to spend some good time with her. She got to spend that time with him. And they were able to end that on their own terms, and he was able to spend her last moments with her. And I think that, even though he might not look at that as acceptable loss, I think that's the kind of loss you look at, you're like, well, at least I know I did everything that I could. We spent her final coherent moments together happy, and she went how she would have wanted to. And I think that is it might be a little bit of a reach to call that acceptable loss, and I think it's difficult when you're dealing with the death of a loved one, but another acceptable loss here is I think that Kareem, at the end of the episode ends with Kareem looking like he's like this close to crying. And I think that loss of a friend, someone who he was so happy when Haywood joined the team, and Haywood's always been understanding of Kareem's very pro-black, borderline militant kind of outlook. And I think Kareem looked at him as somebody like, okay, here's somebody on the team who's not some young fuck who's going to irritate me. Here's somebody on the team who can relate to me and understand me. And it felt like he lost a friend. But his acceptable loss there is he saved this guy's life probably. He's going to, he doesn't look like it's going to be too great for him right away, but how the episode ends for Haywood. But ultimately, this is a guy who, Spencer Haywood does live through this. That's documented fact. And then, he could have died. Like, you keep this up. Yeah, you give him through the finals. Maybe he blows your shot at an NBA championship, and that's a much bigger loss than helping him, get his life together, and you lose him as a friend. It's like, okay, well, you still get to win the championship. Spoiler alert, the Lakers win the championship. I've said it, I think I've on these videos a few times, so I don't feel like that's a spoiler. You could Google 1980 NBA Finals, and you'll see that the Lakers beat the Sixers in, I think it was 6 games. But they win a championship, and he loses his friend, but at least this guy gets to live, and they get their championship. So I think, again, in that moment for Kareem, this probably doesn't feel like acceptable loss, but right now, Kareem, who apparently doesn't like the show, if he were to watch that episode, assuming that was kind of close to reality, I think he could look back on that and go, it felt shitty with what happened to Haywood at the end, during those playoffs. But at the end of the day, he might not be alive he might not have lived through this if we hadn't done that. And we might not have won the championship if we hadn't done that either. So I think maybe now Kareem can look at that as acceptable loss. At least I like to think that he could. So let's talk about this episode. I'm already 5 minutes in. I've only been talking about the title. This episode really focused primarily on the coaching situation, which has kind of been the through line for most of this season, is what's going to happen as far as who's going to coach the team. Which, if you had told me that coming into the season, like, hey, guess what? The majority of winning time is not really going to focus too much on Magic. It will, but it's more so going to focus on who's going to coach the team, which is what they open up the season with. And I think it's interesting that they found a way to make that pretty compelling, even though the answer is either, depending on who you are, well-known or easily Googleable. Yeah, I said Googleable. So Bus wants Jerry West to make the decision. He doesn't want to handle it. I think, well, for one, there's a great scene where Jack's wife confronts him when he's on like an exercise bike, and he's basically kind of, she says that she found a page out of the phone book in his pocket because apparently he doesn't remember their address. And he blows up at her and says something like, "I bet you were happy when I was all laid up and you had some, something to care about for once," or something like that. And she snaps on him, talking about she stayed there all that time and was beating on his chest whenever his heart stopped. And like, really great scene between these two. But after that, Jerry Buss comes to the door. He rings the doorbell and he's got champagne. And he's like, "Special delivery for Jack McKinney." And Jack doesn't know who it is. Like, from our perspective, it looks like he just can't see because it's too sunny out or something like that. But he's telling his wife to come sign for this package, and it's your fucking boss standing at your doorstep with a bottle of champagne. And I think the show wants us to take away from that Bus had made the decision to give McKinney the job, but when he saw him in that state, not recognizing him, he went, "Yeah, nope, this isn't gonna work," and changed his mind and gave the opportunity to Westhead and Pat Riley. And I think I thought that was really nice how they were somewhat ambiguous with that. But what really, I think, I don't want to say bothered me, but I feel like this should not have been this difficult of a decision. You hire McKinney, he does well, but in a very, very short period of time. And then whether or not you look at him as the architect of this team and say Westhead just took that blueprint and just worked with it, he still found success over 50 something games, 60 games maybe. No, it was more than 60 games. Whatever case, I think they said that McKinney was like 9-3 before he got hurt or something like that. So I don't know, something to that effect. But 70 games. We'll just say around 70 games. That Westhead proved that he was at the very least able to handle the blueprint that McKinney did. So how do you take the team that performed that well for 90% of the season under a different guy and even have a question as to who should coach the team? Why would you want to fuck up that chemistry? Why would you want to get rid of the guy that is continue to help your team prosper? Like, even though McKinney might have been the guy, you don't make that change before the playoffs. Like, to me, this should not have been this difficult of a decision. So to have this play out throughout the entirety of this episode, McKinney's okay, but we want to do this with Westhead. Like, to me, that I feel like there's no way this was really that tough of a decision in reality. Like, in reality, Jerry Buss looked at that as like, okay, Westhead's won like fucking 60 games out of 70. Why the fuck are we even having this discussion? But that's what happens. And at the end of the episode, Buss offers the job to Paul Westhead and Pat Riley, and McKinney is presumably told by Sharman that he won't be brought back in. Buss also in this episode, I think, deals with his mother's deteriorating health in a way that I've acknowledged O'Reilly for doing this during this season, which is taking something shitty but putting on a good face. He does that again in this episode, but then now it's starting to crack. He has this doctor come in and tells him, like, your mom's pretty much, it's inevitable what's going to happen to her. And he snaps on this guy. A great moment for O'Reilly. And he continues to do a great job with showcasing how Jerry Buss maintains a certain public persona while dealing with his internal demons, whether those demons, whether or not they be his own self-doubt, whether it be issues with his mother, questions about his daughter, questions about his love life, all of that turmoil, questions about the team, and owning it, which he admits to Jerry West he's in over his head in this episode, which I thought that was a great scene too. You know, dealing with all of this shit internally and how he completely masks it with this over-the-top persona that he does publicly. And I like how they showed him kind of that crack in it when the doctor gives us that bad news. Because when the doctor comes in, he's all like, you know, what do you want to drink? And he's like, what's the good news? Like almost to put pressure on him, like you have to give me good news because I just asked you what the good news is. And that makes it harder for you to go, I have bad news. But this guy does it and Buss snaps on him. And I thought that was a really great scene as well. And then he takes his mother off of life support during the finals. This follows another good scene where they broke into this house that I guess they used to break into when they were poor. And they hang out by this pool, which clearly hasn't been kept up in a while. So it looks like this house is probably abandoned. Buss says that he can get it for cheap if his mother wants to live in it. And they drink and play cards. There's like a weird cut when she says she wants to cut the cards. She doesn't even finish the statement. And then the scene cuts and it jumps forward in time, which I thought that was an interesting decision. Which also another interesting decision I loved was after the scene where Buss, at the end of the scene where Buss blows up on the doctor, he hits the camera like, get the fuck out of here. Like, what? Talk about really breaking the fourth wall. Yeah, he takes her off life support during the finals, and they do a great job of juxtaposing the happiness of the win and the trip to the finals for the Lakers with the devastation that Jerry and Jeannie are experiencing with her mother, with his mother in the hospital. So, you know, they got their win. He too gets that win, but he's also unfortunately getting this loss as well at the same time. I didn't look up, you know, I've been starting to do these like fact checks at the end of these videos to let you guys know how real certain elements of each episode were. I didn't look up the timeline for when Jerry Buss's mother died, but I feel like we're probably dealing with a little creative license here with him taking her off life support as they make it to the finals. Like that seems, I don't know, a little bit too on the nose. There's another storyline with Jeannie wanting to get this job in PR on the team. Claire recommends her for it. And Jerry's like, nope, she needs to be staying here, taking care of her grandmother. And now that the grandmother's passed, now we're left to wonder, is Jeannie going to take this role? Because Jeannie really wants it, clearly. But Buss has always been, it seemed, kind of like not just opposed to Jeannie being in the business, but even kind of opposed to like women doing powerful type shit and not being like half-naked cheerleaders. So like this is a guy who uses women sexually and doesn't really look at them in that light. So for him to put his daughter in that position, I think is going to be a source of conflict in the finale of him, you know, wanting to not look at his daughter in that way, but still not wanting to give her that job. And we know that what Jeannie Buss went on to end up doing, like, well, spoiler alert, she currently owns the Lakers. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play that out throughout the finale or throughout multiple seasons. We have another storyline with Spencer Haywood dealing with his drugs. We saw him last week with the crack. This week we see him on pills and on crack, looking for crack. He blows up on the team. Well, blows up on individual players. And eventually he promises Kareem that he's going to be off drugs for the playoffs. But apparently right before the finals, he falls off the wagon. They see him just fell out in the hallway. And the team votes on whether or not he should stay with the team or he should be waived. And Kareem initially seems on board with keeping him on the team. He's he promised me he'd be good through the finals and then he'll go to rehab. But the team is kind of like, I don't know if he could really cut it. We don't want him to cost us this. And I think Magic finally swayed Kareem by saying he thinks that Haywood is just not strong enough. And he said, a great man once told me that if you want to win a championship, it's going to be hard, which was the conversation that him and Kareem had. I think that was last episode, or it might have been 2 episodes ago. So Kareem then has a conversation with Spencer Haywood to kind of deliver this news. And there's a great scene. Wood Harris kills this fucking scene, by the way. Speaking of which, I like the fact that his name is Wood Harris and they call Spencer Haywood Wood on the show. So they're calling him Wood. And he's probably just like, to him, this is like they're just calling him by his regular name. But Wood Harris kills this scene, man. Throughout the whole episode, whenever we saw Spencer Haywood, we see these weird flashes of scenes that didn't make sense. Like what looked like an old white man, a baby, and like, what is this? And he tells this story about where he grew up and how it's pretty much like a plantation. And, he was talking about how his family considered him blessed to have such big hands, and that he was going to, that'd make him really good at picking cotton one day. Like with the long fingers, you can just grab cotton so easily. I don't know. But they also say that, God loves black people and all this kind of shit. And he's like, if he loves us so much, why are we at the bottom? And he said that, I guess his mom said, because God loves white people more. He didn't say white people, he said them, but that's what we're meant to take away from it. And he's like, now they're going to determine what's going to happen to me. And Kareem's like, well, actually, they put it in our hands and we voted. Team voted to waive him. And then he's devastated and he goes, well, you did what you could. And then Kareem's like, let me pour some more salt on that wound. I was the deciding vote. And Haywood loses it and leaves. And it was a great scene, man. If that's the last we see of Wood Harris on this show, bravo, man. That was a great fucking way to go out. Love that scene. So then he leaves. And he goes to what I'm assuming is some kind of junkie's house, or at least whoever it is he's buying his drugs from. And he asks this guy if he still has this Magnum. And I don't remember what his reply was, but he said, he was like, you don't matter. As long as you have any gun, I want you to kill the Lakers. And that's how the episode ends, with apparently Spencer Haywood trying to put a hit out on the Lakers. There's also a great scene too, and I think it was just before this one, where Kareem teaches Magic how to do the skyhook. And I love that rapport with them, and I love Kareem explaining just like the concept of the skyhook, not just like the mechanics of like, hey, I'm tall as shit and I'm putting my body in between me and the other people. So it's like literally an impossible shot to block. It's about, making yourself big, making it so that they can't see you or predict what you're going to do, being alone when you're taking this shot. So they make this is a really good scene too. And I don't know what the long-term plan is for this show, but as soon as I saw this scene, it reminded me, like, a lot of this shit that happens on the show is well, not all, a lot of it, all of it is before my time, but there's a lot of stuff that I'm aware of just because I like to study NBA history, particularly that kind of lineage when you talk about like the history of the Lakers and the history of the Celtics. But a lot of this shit I wasn't aware of, but I did know when I saw this scene, I see him teaching them the skyhook. Even before Kareem came in, when I saw Magic practicing the skyhook, I know that in the 87 finals, Magic won a game with like a running skyhook against the Celtics. So I don't know what the long-term plan is for this show. If they plan on like, when they do a previously on in like season 8, and they're like, why are we seeing this scene from season 1 where Magic's learning the skyhook? It's because it's this game against the Celtics where he's going to use the skyhook to win it. But I don't know if that's the case, but it made me think of that. So I'm at 18 minutes. This is a good time to wrap up. But I do want to do like my fact checks again. Some of these I've already covered, but the Lakers did get a first round bye via winning the division. Right now, it's set up where like the top 2 seeds get first round byes. Back then, it was just the winner of every division, but that was still the Lakers. They still got that first round bye. They did in fact play Phoenix in the semis and Seattle in the Western Conference Finals. They did in fact win both of those series, so that was legit. They did go to the finals and play the 76ers. I mentioned earlier that they did win that series. Big spoilers, whatever. But they do play the Sixers in the finals, which means it is true that the Celtics did not make it that year. They showed some reporter saying that he felt that despite losing, that Larry Bird's performance in the playoffs warranted him winning Rookie of the Year, which he does end up winning Rookie of the Year. So all that's true. The biggest change in this episode revolves around Spencer Haywood. He gets waived by the team prior to the finals, and then tries to hire this hitman to kill the Lakers. And I'm sure you guys will watch that and be like, okay, well, this is clearly being done for dramatic effect here. But no, that is based on some reality. So apparently, rather than waive Spencer Haywood before the finals, they suspended him after Game 3. I believe Game 3, after the Game 3, I think they won Game 3, so they were up 2-1. Yeah, I think it went like Lakers, Sixers, and then the Lakers won the next 2. So Game 3, they would have won Game 3. They suspended Spencer Haywood after that. And this was not a team vote. This was just Paul Westhead's decision. And apparently Spencer Haywood didn't take kindly to that. And this is something he talked about, I think, in like some autobiography or in an article or something. So this is from Spencer Haywood's own mouth that he did this. He called up some homie from here in Detroit, because he wasn't born here, but he grew up here. He called some homie from Detroit, and they talked about actually setting up Paul Westhead to get killed. Like they were gonna like sabotage his car or some shit like that, like fuck with his brakes or something like that. And then because of the paranoia that he experiences when he's on drugs, his mother asked him what he was up to, and he just totally copped to it. And I guess she talked him out of doing it. But like he really was about to try to have Paul Westhead killed. So that's the big difference is it wasn't a waive, it was a suspension. It wasn't before the finals, it was during. And he didn't put out a hit on the whole Lakers, just on Paul Westhead. So still really fucked up. So really strong episode, I think, this week. Looking forward to the finale. And until then, peace.